Hey, my name is Greg, and welcome to my ridiculous channel, Greg with 5Gs. And no, you don't spell my name with 5Gs. I have 5 girls, 5 daughters. My older two aren't really girls anymore, they're young women, so I thought about going with daughter instead of girl. But Greg with 5Ds conjured very strange images into my brain. You could replace a nose with a D, instead of ears, you've got Ds. Imagine what that would look like if you shook your head no. Floppy, floppy, floppy. Anyway, I'm not a professional woodworker or contractor, but give me a how-to video on YouTube and a shed full of tools, and I'm fairly convinced I can do anything. This channel is not meant to be educational, it's meant to be entertainment. When my kids found out that I was going to start a YouTube channel, they said, it has to be funny, otherwise no one will watch it. I'm going to try a format where instead of having a voiceover that explains what I'm doing, I'm going to let you just watch me fumble around while I tell you stupid but hopefully entertaining stories. I came right out of the gate with a D joke, so yeah. You're about to find out just how not funny I am. In this video, I'm building my first ever epoxy project. I'm making a desk for myself out of slabs that came from a hickory tree that fell down on my parents' property. The look I was going for was granite with a sapphire vein running through it. I think it ends up looking pretty cool, but it looks more like water than stone. I didn't pay for Kim's workshop, but probably should have because I made a bunch of avoidable mistakes. Anyway, enough about the desk, let's get to the story. The other day I got asked, have you ever run from the cops? I was like, well, yeah. They asked, what happened? Which time? And my daughter goes, Dad, how many times have you run from the cops? There's no good answer to that question after establishing that it's more than 0. If you're curious to know, take a guess in the comments below and I will let you know if you're right. This story is about the most recent time I ran from the cops. And yes, I was a full-grown, although maybe not fully mature, adult human in my 30s when it happened. I used to work in a children's hospital that was connected to a university. The streets around the hospital were all permitted parking. So I would park on a street that was about a 20-minute walk from my office. The route from my parking spot to my office took me right past the Ronald McDonald House. Now, there is something y'all need to know about me. I am way too willing to intervene and make a scene. For example, quick side story, stay with me here. My wife and I went on our honeymoon to Portugal, which, by the way, is the best European country for an American to visit, but stay away from Porto. Porto sucks. I firmly stand by that statement. You can hit me up in the comments arguing otherwise, but you are wrong. So, it's our second night in Portugal, and we are at this very swanky Michelin-starred restaurant. There's this British guy there that's like vaguely part of the royalty or something. I don't really understand European royalty and why it's still a thing, or I guess more importantly, why anyone cares who these people are. But because this guy was born into a certain family, he thinks he can treat anyone around him like garbage. We get seated right next to this guy. Now, I don't know why fancy food is tiny food, but it is. That's part of the deal. I'm a Southern man. I like fried food in large portions. But my wife wanted a fancy dinner on our honeymoon, and I was doing my best to appreciate that we could afford such an amazing experience, even if the portions were tiny. The waitress brings out the next course for this guy's table and puts it down in front of him, and he screams in a British accent, which I'm not going to attempt. I'm paying this much money, and that's all I get? What went through my head was, I'm with you, but you don't gotta be rude to the waitress about it. The waitress was very apologetic and offered to get her manager so that he could speak with him. She handled herself very well, but he didn't want to talk to the manager. Some time passes, and their table moves on to the dessert course. The plate gets put down in front of this guy, and he's all, Oi! Is this a joke with how small this is? The waitress responds, I'm so sorry. If you aren't happy with the portions, you can talk to my manager, or you can even talk to the chef. He's all, I just want to know if this is a joke. And so I intervened. I screamed, "Hey!" He looked at me in disbelief that I would be addressing him. So I was like, "Yeah, you," making sure he knew I was talking to him. "Are you seriously that dumb that you think she has anything to do with the portion sizes?" He looks at me and goes, "Mind your own." I was like, "No, seriously, do you not understand how restaurants work? She's offered to let you talk to the manager and the chef. Either take her up on that or shut up." He's all, "You really need to mind your own." To which I said, "I was until you started screaming across the whole restaurant, making your business everyone else's. Stop yelling at her for things she has absolutely no control over." His son looked up at him and goes, "You deserve that, you wanker." Which luckily shut him up, because if he had stood up, I was more than willing to throw down with this dude in the middle of this super fancy restaurant. I turned back to my wife and apologized for making a scene, and she goes, "It's okay. I know who I married." I was like, "Aw, you do love me." All right, so now that you understand that I'm too willing to make a scene, let's go back to me walking past the Ronald McDonald House every morning on my way into work. It's common for the medical students and residents to live in the apartments and houses that are walking distance to the hospital. So there's like medium foot traffic on this particular street. One morning, as I approached the Ronald McDonald House, I saw a cop writing a parking ticket for a car that was parked on the street right outside of the Ronald McDonald parking lot. I will remind you, the street is permanent parking, but this car is literally 3 feet from their parking lot. The cop was a heavyset man that appeared to be in his early 20s. His hair was oddly disheveled for how short it was, and his mustache was way too long. As I got closer, I could see that this car had an out-of-state license plate. And so I intervened. I walked right up to this cop, causing him to look up from his stupid metal clipboard. I looked at him with confusion on my face and asked, "Do you know why someone with an out-of-state license plate would be parked in front of a Ronald McDonald House?" He looked back down at his clipboard and said, "Sir, you need to keep moving along." And I'm like, "No! This family is here because they have a child that is so sick that they traveled from out of state to come to this fancy research hospital." He cut me off right there and grunted, "Sir, you really need to keep moving along." But I kept at it. They are likely trying an experimental therapy as a last-ditch effort to save their child's life, and they are staying at a Ronald McDonald House because they can't afford a hotel, much less the medical bills that I'm sure are piling up. And to add insult to injury, you're going to make them come out this morning to a parking ticket? I hear, "Ew," over my shoulder and glanced to see a very attractive female resident stare down this poor cop as she walked by. I mean, her eyes were ice. I looked back at the cop and could see in his eyes the devastating, soul-crushing effect that this woman's disgust had on him. And for whatever reason, it was in that moment that my ADHD impulsiveness took full control of my body, and I swung my hand as hard as I could, and I slapped the clipboard out of his hands, sending it crashing to the street. The cop screamed, "All right, that's it," and reached for his cuffs with one hand and reached for me with the other. I slapped his hand to the side and took off running down the street. He gave a few steps of chase and then stopped. I looked over my shoulder and screamed, "Don't be a dick!" and flipped the double bird as I ran away to the cheers of the other commuters on the street. I didn't know if he was going to call it in, so I ran all the way to my office, and I looked over my shoulder like I was some kind of spy or something before walking inside. But I got away with it. I'll never know if he actually wrote that family a ticket. And that was the most recent time that I've run from the cops. I really hope my kids don't take after me. Although, They are like me in certain ways. The other day, my 8-year-old, Harper, went to take a bath after her sisters had already showered and used all of the hot water. She let the bath fill all the way up and went to get in it just to realize that the water was cold. She screamed and angrily splashed the water all over the walls. We went in to see what the matter was, and my 14-year-old asks her, "What was that?" Harper responded, "When I get mad, I just want to punch something." Feel that, girl. I feel that. Don't ever lose that fire. Don't ever lose that fire. You know what? If you ever see someone on the playground getting bullied, you let that fire out. In fact, you have my permission to kick that bully right in the vagina. You kick her right in the vag. I didn't actually say that to my child, but there's a part of me that wishes I had. You see, I'm from a small town, one that's had out-of-towners show up and protest. The Unite the Right rally, you know, the one where Nazis ran over innocent people. Jason Aldean isn't actually from a small town, which I assume is why he wasn't able to capture the sentiment of community correctly. It ain't about politics. It doesn't matter what color you are, what church you do or don't go to, or what pronoun you use. It's about looking out for the people around you, all of the people around you. To give an example, I was a tutor and helped out in an after-school program for kids in the underserved community. This meant that occasionally I walked down those streets alone. Those were not mean inner city streets, but I was a privileged and naive white guy walking through a black neighborhood. One evening, I was walking down the street, and up ahead was a group of young black males. I did the white racist thing and crossed the street and picked up my pace. But as soon as they noticed me, they started yelling at me and moved towards me. I'm not street smart, but I knew enough to know to not engage with them. I was not going to make it past them before they reached my side of the street, and I was just about to tuck tail and run the other way when I heard, "Hey!" A shirtless, very muscular man stood up on his front porch about 20 yards from where I was. He didn't say anything else. He just stared down that group of young men. When they saw him, they stopped in their tracks. They thought about it for a second, and then they turned and walked away. I nodded a "thank you" to him, and he nodded back, and we went on with our lives. That man didn't have to intervene, but he did. He looked out for the people around him. Treating people with respect isn't actually that hard, so we should demand it of ourselves. There's bullies everywhere: the left, the right, the city, the country, faraway lands. So, whether it's an underprivileged family being mistreated by the cops, a cop that's being berated by a privileged white guy, or a bully on the playground with a bruised vagina, they should all be treated with respect. Hopefully, you've enjoyed my stories. If you'd like to support me and my channel, the best way to do that is actually through my real job, which is selling solar panels. The less time I have to spend generating leads for that job, the more time I have to make videos. So if you've ever had an interest in solar, live in one of the 30 plus states that we service, and want to set up a virtual appointment with me, which I am sure will include more of my stupid stories, then shoot me an email. I will include that in the links below, and we can get something set up for you. And remember, folks, it's never too late to not be a dick.